Hello and welcome to everyone watching this on Facebook and YouTube, and to anyone watching this back as well. I'm Kate, I'm Head of Programmes for Brighter Sound. We're a new music and talent development charity who support young and emerging artists and industry professionals with a particular focus on the north of England. This is the fourth and final day of our Let's Reconnect festival. It's been a 4-day celebration of new music, creativity and collaboration. For today's panel, we have BSL interpreters, and for people who would benefit from captions, we recommend watching this on Facebook. For our lunchtime session today, we're really delighted to welcome Mike Pony, Anil, Sebastian and Amber J for a discussion that's going to explore the importance of LGBTQIA plus narratives in music. Thanks very much.
Hello, my name's Mike Pony and I'm the Artistic Director of Submerge, which is a queer-led producing organisation and festival. We were previously based in Bristol and I'm currently in the process of reimagining the festival in the north. The theme of today's discussion is queer and evolving identities and personal awakenings, and we'll be speaking to artists Anil, Sebastian and Amber J. For clarity, we'll be using the word queer quite fluidly in this talk to refer to all LGBTQIA plus identities. I'm going to chat to each artist independently for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions for Anil and Amber to have a more open discussion. And at the end of the talk, we'll provide a link to the premiere of the mini documentary Amber has been making for Brighter Sound, which was created in response to their Let's Reconnect season, which showcases the documentary showcases queer artists from the Northwest. So just to start, Anil Sebastian is a multidisciplinary artist, producer and vocalist, producing some of the most unique and otherworldly music to emerge from the UK in recent years. As well as their solo work, Anil is also in the Icelandic band Hrim with singer Usp and producer Sheriff Hashizume. Their debut album Mesonoxian was released in late 2017 and was described as a gorgeous listen from start to finish and brave at every turn by Line of Best Fit. Anil, hello.
Hi.
So,
after all that.
Yeah, well, it came from your website. So welcome to our panel.
Thank you.
First things first, straight in there, how did you get started making music?
Oh, how did I start making music? I don't remember is the answer. It's just really like in my DNA and in my family. So the earliest memory I've got is being in a band called Play School with my older brothers, 3 brothers. And so I remember we had a song called Anil Scream, and it was kind of like a punk situation on my parents' bed, and they were like da, 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 and then one of them would go Anil Scream, and I'd go ah. So that's basically how it started. Yeah.
Amazing. And does the scream still appear in your work sometimes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I think screaming's really good for you, actually.
Same, particularly in a pandemic.
Big believer in a good scream. Yeah.
So the theme of this discussion is personal awakenings in relation to artistic identities. And I just wondered if you could speak about your music and how your artistic identity has evolved over your music making career. Mm-hmm. Maybe tell us about your first album and how you started making music.
Yeah, sure. I'm being about to be Zoom bombed by my cat that's creeping around behind me. I'm really sorry. How did it start? Music, my album. Well, so funnily enough, I really hid away a lot, which seems strange given some of the things that I've done, but very much my album came quite late in life. Not really, but like later than your early 20s, let's say. And I had made a record in my early 20s, which kind of just never saw the light of day. And I kind of got into being in a band. We released an album there. I got a lot of session work. and that really sort of kicked me off. And then I started London Contemporary Voices Choir, and actually it's a blessing and a curse in terms of identity, because it was amazing. It is amazing. And I got to meet so many incredible people, but I really started to become quite a chameleon. And I lost contact a little bit with my own artistic identity. And it got to the point where around about a couple of years ago, I started experiencing quite a lot of dysphoria, because I was feeling like I was constantly performing this role of you know, the male singer, the session singer, the gospel singer, the classical singer, whatever it was that I was being asked to do, I was that, and I wasn't being myself. And now I think that I've reclaimed that I can still do those things and still be myself doing those things. So life is a lot better now. And my first album I started making in secret. I was that worried about it. And then I let my brother in on it. And he was the first person, and my partner at the time, who I was playing things to. And very, very slowly, it took me a long time to make that record, not because it was hard to make technically, but because I just found it really hard to sit in my own skin at that point and be me. And it felt like a very scary thing. A part of that is because my natural singing voice is, I guess, I don't know what you describe it as. I guess it's kind of genderless in a way. It's not, if you heard it, you wouldn't know how to place it. And most people think I'm a female singer when they hear me singing. And it wasn't until I started working with Guy Sigsworth on his record, his album, and he's such a hero of mine, that when I started working with him, he was basically saying, that's good. Like, when you sing like you, that's what I love. I love that. I want you to do that on my record. And that just gave me such a lift, and I felt seen, really. And I felt like finally someone was hearing what I do and not telling me not to do it, and actually telling me do it more. And the band I was in, just to say about that, early on, there was a lot of, it was great and I loved it and it was like a family, but there was a lot of damage that happened from how it was received in the industry. So there was lots of like record labels coming to shows, and back then it was this perception of like, oh God, they're all brown, and they're in an alternative kind of post-rock band. They're all brown though. And one of them's wearing loads of makeup and is kind of like queer at looking, and what the hell? And I felt they actually said, you know, find the makeup confusing, you know, and there was this pressure to fit in and be this kind of like, to have this aesthetic of this rock band, and it just really jarred against my nature. And I felt really like out of place the whole time because of that. And it wasn't about the music, it was about the image and the aesthetic. That was the concern. And that the fact that it was so overt, and it was just like, it was okay at that point to actually say that.
And what kind of time period are we talking about with those kind of attitudes?
20, I guess, when was that? So, oh gosh, so around about somewhere between 2013 and 2016-ish.
Right.
Lots of things overlapped. So my band was going on while I was making my first record, and while the choir was happening as well. There were lots of overlaps, but around about that, kind of somewhere between, I guess, like, yeah, like 2010-ish, I would say, probably, actually. So, you know, not that long ago. Oh, like recent enough for people to know better. But, you know, it still goes on now, just people don't vocalize it in quite the same way.
Yeah, I mean, just for people who aren't familiar, can you tell us a bit about London Contemporary Voices and what that is?
Yeah, sure. So I started a choir 10 years ago now, 2010, with my then partner, Didier Rochard, who was an amazing artist and singer. And we founded this choir because we'd been invited to an Imogen Heap show, and she's an artist that I'd worked with as a guitarist before. And she wanted a choir of all her friends for this Royal Albert Hall show. And I was one of those people, but it turned out that lots of the other people ended up being repurposed as musicians on stage in some other way. So I put together a choir of 40 people with Didier and his sister. And that is what then kind of, we just, at the end of that, were like, oh, didn't ever think of doing this. This is great. And kept it going. And she's been a supporter of it ever since and has been really incredibly helpful towards me and my career, but also the choir. And it just went from strength to strength.
Sorry, you go.
Yeah, no, go on. No.
In relation to the making your own music, and you mentioned about prejudice around being queer, brown, and wearing makeup. In terms of your own solo music, how is queerness manifest in that? How is it visible? Is it visible in the lyrics? Is it visible in the music? Or is it more visible in the way that you present?
I've thought about this. I think it's so part of who I am that it's bound to be in the music and in the visual identity, but not sort of maybe not like overtly, and maybe not in the kind of I don't know, is there a stereotype of the queer artist? Maybe there is. It's not obviously, it's not like I'm doing like ballroom music or something, although I'd love to. It's not like that. I guess it takes more influence from artists like Bjork and Stiegel Ross. And I consider them to be queer icons because, you know, they are lyrically and otherwise. And there's something very punk at the core of that. And I guess in the lyrics, in my album, I talk a lot about identity. I talk about a lot about loss. And I've never been one for, like, you know, if I'm talking about a guy, I talk about a guy, you know. And a lot of it's about grief, because that was quite a dominant force at that point in my life. And more recently, my work is about identity, but it's particularly in relation to value, consciousness, technology, and othering in general. So there's always this idea of technology is the other, it's over there. Queerness is the other, it's over there. And there is a relationship between those things. And there's an interesting intersection where if we really embrace those things, there is a huge amount that we can learn. And there's a huge amount of growth and creative brilliance at those intersections, I feel.
I mean, that feels like there are so many more questions, but that feels like a great place to just pause for a moment. I have so many more questions for you, but I think it's a good place to switch over to chatting to Amber with some similar questions and just see if there are any kind of parallels.
Awesome.
So see you in a bit.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey, Amber.
Hello. I nearly forgot to unmute myself then.
Yeah, sorry, I sprung that on you. I had so many more questions, but it feels more appropriate for it to be a conversational thing between you later. So let's chat now about you, and then we'll bring Anil in after that. So same questions, really. How did you get started making music?
So I started playing drums when I was about 8 or 9. That was the first sort of like introduction to music. I saw a kit in Costco once when I was shopping with my mum, and asked for it, and she kind of looked at me in a way of being like, no way, you're never getting that, like, as if and then lo and behold, at Christmas I got the kit. So that was the first like introduction to sort of like music, but actually like songwriting was not until I started picking up the guitar and just trying to learn some chords, and it just became very natural to just start songwriting, and not really to share, not like with any purpose to share, because that would have been the worst thing really if anyone ever heard my songs. I used to write them on pieces of scrap of paper and then like stuff it under my wardrobe so that no one could like ever find my songs. But yeah, and I just kind of like it just came gradually out of me. Like I had a guitar teacher and he would ask if I did any songwriting, and when one time I said, oh yeah, I do actually have a song, and showed it him, and he was very like praised me quite a lot about it, and kind of gave me that little bit of confidence to start playing my songs, and even just thinking about going to maybe an open mic and playing them, or even just starting to record them. And yeah, it's been a journey since then. That was maybe when I was like 14, 15, and I didn't release a song until I was 20. So there was a big gap between actually starting writing and then releasing was much later.
And I realise I've been really remiss and haven't read your bio, but I see that you're kind of broadly working within bedroom and alt pop, and you've been supported by BBC Introducing, and you've just released your debut EP, which is Never Too Far From a Dark Thought. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so the collection of songs we've written over a time when, like, maybe from ages 17 to 20, and I'd been sat on them for so long, and it wasn't until I met a producer called Curran Carbell who really brought the songs to life and gave them an energy that I finally, I heard the sound that I've always wanted to sound like when he produced them. And so we worked together, put the tracks together and formed an EP. And the first single from that, Pencil Brims, was released in November, which was amazing. But yeah, Never Too Far From a Dark Thought, the time frame within which it was written was a time where I felt like I was constantly like never too far from a dark thought, like kind of tailing that line of like keeping my mental health together and like constantly like keeping a ball up in a way. And so it felt very fitting that, some of the themes that I cover within the songs talk about that time. So it felt very fitting to kind of stamp it and then release it, and kind of send that chapter into the ether and send it away. To be honest, that's kind of how it felt once I released it.
So you talked a little bit about themes and feelings in relation to that title. Is that something you can tell us any more about, or is that something we just need to listen to?
I think it was just a personal like sort of journey of like, I just as a kid really struggled with lots of different things, and went through different struggles with my mental health, and I think music, until I actually saw a vision and a path for my own music, that was really like, it sounds cheesy, but like that's when everything started to make sense and my mental health really improved once I saw a vision and a path that I could follow. But in those years when I was kind of still really low on confidence, songwriting, didn't know what I wanted to do, like a lot of other things was troubling me because I wasn't entirely happy and didn't have a direction. So until I kind of found music and I found a path of being an artist and how to really articulate that, that was when the key kind of came to happiness in a way and a bit of inner peace.
That's lovely to hear. Thinking a little bit about the history of queerness in music and when you were younger, like, who were you inspired by? Who were you listening to? What was your favourite thing to listen to? I
think I listened to a lot of like when I was very young, people like Dodie, like that internet era of like artists who were being quite candid and like talking openly about sexuality. And I think that was the first time I sort of, saw myself reflected in people, and that gave me a lot of confidence within myself, just seeing someone else talk so openly about how who they are, and I think that's why like now I feel compelled to like be honest and not be dishonest, and just talk about truthfully and try not to sort of be ambiguous with sexuality, because I think the most like important thing for me was seeing other people and seeing myself reflected in them. But Dodie was definitely one of the first people. Then more recently, like Marika Hackman, The Japanese House, who are all queer artists. And yeah, I think as I wanted to develop as an artist and grow, I saw myself in them and saw a path and saw a place in the industry for me as well, because they were like successful artists, being open, being themselves, writing about their queer relationships and stories. And I thought, well, they're doing it, they're good, that I can do that. And it made it so much easier for me.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And to what extent is your queerness visible in the lyrics you write, the music you make? How does it manifest?
It is quite visible, and I think it's mainly within like the pronouns I use. Like I use she a lot when writing about relationships and experiences, and so that came with time though. When I first started writing songs, I used to kind of sit there with the paper and the pen, and I'd get to the end of the sentence and I'd write she, and then I'd cross it out, and then I'd write he, and then I'd cross it out, and then I'd put they, and I just didn't know, like I wasn't confident enough to put like the right pronouns in of who I was talking about, and so now I just write, and whatever comes out is what the song is. And it's it's got to that point now where I even forget about it, and I've had people, producers who I'm working with, turn around and go, oh, it's cool that you say like she, and I'm like, do I? Like, and I guess like I'm so oblivious to it now because it feels so natural just to write, honestly, and it'd be more effort, and I think it would devalue it if I then went back and edited a song to try and hide and censor the song in a way, then really to not be truthful and not be exactly how it naturally evolved and came out as I was writing it.
Yeah, and we talked briefly previously about the idea of censorship, which is something I think I'll come back to when both you and Anil are in the conversation. But do you feel like that process of becoming comfortable with your artistic identity and your queer identity intersecting, how has that process been? I mean, this topic is about personal awakenings. Was there a big moment, or was it very fluid and natural for you?
I think it was just time, and also just seeing a lot of other queer artists and discovering them as well. And because, it took time to find the people that I saw myself within, and especially like when it comes to new music and trying to find those people. But yeah, it was definitely a thing that was over time, and it wasn't like a one thing or like something that changed in a day. And yeah, I definitely like thought about it, like when I was thinking about being an artist and how I was going to present myself, and I thought, you know what, I will keep my sexuality ambiguous, I did think like to avoid like any sort of friction or like anything negative that could come along with that. And it didn't last long, to be honest. Before I knew it, I was, on these sort of panels and wanting to talk about things and wanting to make like songs and media that, really did just was honest and helped other people, hopefully, because that's the way I found confidence in myself, to be outspoken and just be honest. So yeah, that's what, yeah.
It feels really important, and the music is incredible. I'd just like to bring Anil back into the conversation if we can.
Yeah, sure.
And then we can sort of have a more general. I've got more questions for both of you, but I think it would be nice to have both of your responses to some of these in a more kind of conversational tone. So really, like whoever wants to answer this, the question is, how has your music been received by audiences, queer audiences and straight audiences? Is that even a thing? Is that even important?
Don't know. What do you reckon, Amber?
How is it? I mean, my last EP was the first time that something as I've released has reached anyone beyond like family and friends and people who are close to me. So it was very like lovely to have a different audience like hear the music. And you know, like even people like Diva magazine picked it up, which was mad, because I used to read like Diva magazine as a kid. And yeah, I think just within my music it will naturally attract a queer audience and people who see themselves within the stories that lie within my songs. But yeah, I think that's a really important thing though, that you know, people see themselves, and it creates like a stronger bond, I think, than just hearing a song going, oh, that's cool, I like it. If someone sees like themselves within a narrative, and that's that connects the artist much more to the audience than just liking a song for liking a song.
Yeah. And I feel like, because when you were speaking about kind of that feeling of like representation and growing up and then finding those people yourself, I kind of feel, I don't know, for some reason, I don't really know why, but I have relatively low expectations when it comes to like high ambition for sure, but low expectations in terms of like with any release, because I know my music's really left field. So I know that when I put it out, it could be anything. It could get a great reaction, or it could just be like a few, you know, other weirdos like me going, oh, yay. But I feel like when it happens and you get that resonance with somebody and it's come from an authentic place in you, it means so much more, even if that number of people is smaller. Because things that I've done, you know, where the most successful things that I've done commercially that have had the biggest reach often have the least resonance with me in terms of my own identity. So even if people are like, wow, I can't believe you did that thing, it doesn't necessarily, I'm not saying it doesn't resonate with me at all. Obviously I do celebrate those things, but it can also, it's the biggest joy is when you've been yourself and you've been able to do that and be seen and have that kind of connection, like you talked about, Amber, you know, like that kind of, you know, connection and resonance with, even if it's one person, that means more. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's just true.
Definitely, I feel that as well. Like just someone taking notice or like listening or taking their time, regardless of how they identify, just to listen to your music is huge. I think, like, you know, it's something people don't have to do. So when people do take notice, it's huge.
And I think as well, like in terms of the idea of like the kind of straight audience, I suppose, or I don't know, non-queer, however you'd want to put it. I've actually found that there's been something that's been good for me in that relationship, because I think it's helped me move on from some of the difficulty that I had early on with feeling like an outsider or feeling judged or fear of being judged. And then when you get that kind of reaction and you realize that, you know, I think it's that classic thing of like having an ally who's like, you know, sees you for who you are and goes, I love this is great, I love what you're making. And that does wonders for artists like us, I think, because it means that it helps kind of nothing could ever reverse some of that prejudice that happens early on in life, but it helps put it into a bigger context, and it helps reinforce this idea in everybody that things are changing, even if it's slow. Things are changing and they're different now, you know.
Definitely. Do you think, when you were talking before, Anil, I was thinking, you know, when you had that moment or where you were like, you weren't being yourself and you kind of realized it wasn't really bringing you happiness within what you were doing. Did you ever have that moment where you were like thought twice about it in fear of maybe it having a negative effect on what you were doing and your output, your creative output?
Yeah, I was really worried about it, actually. And I think, you know, there was that point where I was very brave with it, and I was in that period in my early 20s. I was very brave with it, and I was there, you know, being very like punk and very me, and presenting how I wanted to present, singing how I wanted to sing. But I think because of like, we had a good audience reaction, but the industry reaction was this kind of, you need to change, that feeling. I think it really crushed my confidence. And then as my confidence grew getting session work, and I was doing stuff with the choir, and that was going so well, it was a hiding place. And I was terrified, actually. I was really scared. And I think part of me still is, I think. And I think, you know, particularly when it comes to gender, you know, sometimes it's easier for me to present as very, you know, male, just because I feel like people will get that more easily. And whenever I'm presenting away from that, I feel kind of in a session situation, it's adding another thing that makes me feel like, oh God, you know, there's going to be like questions and, you know, awkwardness. And that is for sure still there. And there's plenty of people, I think, who still will completely stumble into being quite unpleasant without maybe even meaning to. So yeah, it's difficult, and I think being completely out with everything is incredibly liberating, but it does also put you in a position of visibility. Also comes with a sense of you know, you're out there then, and you are more open to the downsides of things. But I'd rather have it that way than any other way. And you know, this is how I want to be. So yeah.
Anil, you mentioned about kind of the industry telling you need to change or wanting to control your aesthetic in some way. And Amber, I wonder if you had any kind of thing to say about how the industry manages your aesthetic or manages the way that you create music.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I have thought about it where, you know, my aesthetic, luckily, I think I'm very like straight presenting. Like, I'm not like obviously like queer when people look at me, like through stereotypes, like stereotypical eye. So I can kind of get away with it in a way, and of just like being like Amber J, and like no one really, you know, there's no negative effects to that. Like I'm not instantly vulnerable. Like you said about the session situations. So I feel very like in a comfortable spot of being myself when I'm creating my music, and when I'm, you know, creating my aesthetic and my visuals. I mean, I've thought about it, you know, when like it comes to music videos and things, and you're in those situations. I've, you know, thought about, but what if like there's a girl in the situation, you know, and if there's like a love interest, and it's like, well then, like that kind of scares me a bit, just because that's like a visual and that's like there. Do you know what I mean? But then I think that's just part of like, I don't know, me, and just, you know, growing and that self-acceptance still, you know, at 22, and like growing up even in, you know, a better environment than a lot of other people grew up in, you know, in you know, the olden days. But yeah, like that's still there. Do you know what I mean? That inner shame slightly still, even though it's I am, you know, of that generation where it was a bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's so important for people to hear, and it's so honest to share that, because it's true, and I feel that as well, and I'm sure lots of other people do. And it's important because it's kind of in our queer history, you know. It's no wonder really, when you think of how recent some of that history is, that we would feel that way. And it's the element of possibility, you know, and putting yourself out there carries that possibility all the time. and especially early on, it can be something that it feels sometimes like you either have to push through it or hold back. And actually other artists don't have that, you know, and in a lot of ways it kind of leads to some really amazing work, you know, because you have to push through to something on the other side. But on the other hand, it would be amazing if we didn't have to do that. And when I think of some of my trans and non-conforming friends, you really see it there. I mean, how many trans artists do we know? How many trans singers do we know? Like the gatekeeping and the barriers, there are so many of them that are overtly there in the industry, but then there are so many within ourselves and within kind of people without, you know, just the possibility of prejudice, and then the prejudice itself. There are so many layers to it that you can see that the journey to getting to being on a stage or making a record is suddenly just like, you know, 100 times bigger. And it's not like that there's nothing to say or that there's no artistic voice there. It's there. It's really strong, and there's so much to say. And I question that, and I think why isn't that coming through so much now? And you know, for a lot of queer artists, things have got so much better, but there are still huge issues, particularly for trans and non-conforming artists and people who have the other intersections that go with that, like disabilities or people of color, etc. You know.
Yeah, I don't know if I can name you know, disabled pop stars. It feels, yeah, the intersectionality of the conversation feels really important as well, in that it's not just about marginalized narratives in terms of queerness. It's also like multiple intersectional marginalized narratives and why that's not visible. And I'm quite intrigued by what you were saying about the kind of layers of gatekeeping, you know, before you can get to a stage or an album or whatever. There's all of these other gates you have to go through. And I wondered a bit, Amber had some thoughts the other day around censorship. And like, I wondered, Amber, if you wanted to say something about censorship and your thoughts around how that hasn't affected your work.
Yeah, I think like, you know, like I was saying in the early days where I'd censor my songs a lot in like metaphor to really dilute the meaning and so that my songs, I didn't out myself basically, and that I didn't, you know, a lot of the time I remember one of the first songs I wrote about a queer narrative I saw on screen, and then, you know, it was one of the first songs I wrote, one of the first songs I started sharing, and people would ask me what it's about, and I'd just be like, oh, it's just about a TV show and these characters within it, and would beg that they would not ask any more questions, you know, and I'd have to say it was about a queer narrative. But the thing is, those were the sort of stories that were striking me and, you know, inspiring me to write, and still do now. And even now, you know, with one of the latest tracks on the EP is about a queer narrative that I saw and was inspired by, and in interviews still when I'm asked, like, oh, what's the song about? I'm like diluting it. Like, I just don't, and it's just that thing of like, you want to put that little bit of like protection. You don't want to be so vulnerable. And yeah, it's definitely there. Like the censorship, even now, you know, I was doing it when I first started songwriting, and even now it's still kind of there, but it's probably, yeah, it is there.
Yeah, I that resonates with me a lot. And you know, if I think about my lyrics, they are quite abstract a lot of the time, and you know, there's not that much there that's kind of that direct. It is quite, and in a way I find that quite interesting, because I think, you know, when we are censored from the outside or from within, which is really the same thing actually in a lot of ways, sometimes that leads to some amazing stuff, you know. And if you think about, like, I guess, like, you know, like incredible literature, incredible music that's happened over the years from finding a way to express yourself to your community and your people, but try and retain this kind of ambiguity, can lead to some really beautiful, very nuanced work. But at the same time as that, it's tough as well, because, you know, shouldn't have to do that. And I think, you know, when you talking about censorship, Amber, makes me think a lot about, I do a lot of work in, I guess, like, I survive and earn a lot of my money from doing work in advertising, and that world is really changing a lot. You know, and recently I've become a creative director of a company that does a lot of that kind of work, and that world is changing a lot. It's become incredibly, it's on an incredible trajectory of improving in terms of diversity, you know, and it's now okay for me to be myself and present as myself in that kind of environment. But one of the things I find interesting is that that is the kind of situation right now. That's where we are. And so it's okay for us to tell our stories in that area and have our music placed in that place. But it feels like, with that relationship with the corporate world and money, it's not in our hands, if that makes sense. Those sorts of narratives and perspectives, it's not fully in our hands. It's kind of still somewhere else. So there's still that feeling of, like, right now we're okay, we're fashionable or whatever, you know, and we can be in those places. But what about in 5 years' time? What about 5 years ago? Or, you know, and there's always that kind of you know, thing there. And until we get better representation right the way through into leadership and into just a fairer world, we still have to be in that place of, like, having to kind of walk the tightrope of censorship a bit, I think, and self-censorship. It's tricky.
I mean, it feels like what you're talking about is the kind of industrial commercial control over a broadening set of identities that are acceptable on television or in advertising. But still, if we think of queer as subcultural or anti-mainstream or non-capitalist, then suddenly that stuff all feels much more risky and much more unacceptable in the context of, you know, TV advertising. So a queer meg ad with two men kissing feels outrageous, but actually, you know, it could be way worse and way more subcultural and way more interesting, I think.
Yes.
I'm intrigued about. So you go.
Yeah, and it's when those things are being used to, rather than it's a fine line between, like, genuine representation and things being used in order to kind of be provocative or sell something. And when our identities get sexualized or, like, kind of, you know, used in that way, it does make you want to go and hide away, to be honest, doesn't it? And I definitely find that, particularly with I was catching up with a friend who is a queer non-binary person who is, I guess, by most people's thoughts, fairly female presenting, and they had so much difficulty even at uni of being basically sexualized and being like, oh, you know, imagine you're singing this song to a really hot girl and you're like, oh, you really want them, and, you know, it's all just sort of like, why are you sexualizing everything just because I'm queer? You know, why is that happening? And there is that, and there is this kind of pressure to be the kind of the cool one or the interesting one, or to have the outside perspective. And while that does fit with the whole queer kind of thing, it's when it gets appropriated and used just really for someone else's ends, you know. It's kind of like, well, it's like when you hear trans actresses and actors speaking about their experiences of that kind of dilemma of being given a script and knowing, this is not how I want to be represented, but this is an opportunity to be at least seen, and I need to survive, and I need money, and I need to move forward with my career, but I might not be represented in a way that I like.
And that idea of queer representation is interesting. Amber, I wondered, this is a fairly big question, but where are we currently with queer representation in music? And I wondered, particularly from a kind of queer women's perspective, where are queer women in music now?
I think it's much more, it's much better. Like, there are a lot of like young queer women who are, I think what has helped is like the internet, and people have found audiences through social media, and through like, not through the more traditional ways. Like, audiences have seeked out what the right English is, the people that they see themselves in. They want those sort of artists. They want to consume that work, and they want to support those artists. And so I think people have took control in a bit in that way, and queer people have lifted queer artists up, and they've sort of created a much more diverse music scene, and I think there's always improvements to be made. But I think now when I look out, I can see a lot of people who look like me existing and being successful in the industry, and that's not a lot of other people who don't look like me. They still don't see people that that reflect them in the industry. But in terms of queer women in music, it's something that is definitely, I think, in even the past like 5 years, is incredibly like just improved. And but as always, there's improvements to be made, but it's better.
Yeah.
I read something about.
Oh, sorry.
Go for it. No, go for it.
Sorry. Yeah. It just came to my mind, because one thing that really I think is amazing is seeing artists like you, Amber, who you're very true to who you are. In you're not kind of. What I'm trying to say is that there is this sort of like, I was speaking to somebody who is non-binary, queer and autistic, and they're part of this new transgender choir that I'm setting up, and they were saying that actually when they were younger they didn't even realize that they were queer, because they were like, all queer people have this kind of aesthetic. They kind of like look really cool, and like they have, they wear the nose ring here or whatever, and like they have like this kind of particular, and I definitely know that's true of some queer women I know as well, who are like, there's this stereotype of and a kind of pressure to conform to a certain aesthetic. And I actually think it's brilliant to be seeing such a greater diversity of artists who are just being them. They're just being their own artistic identity and aesthetic, and not just having a range. So we're not always, as queer artists, having to play into a very particular, quite narrow aesthetic or way of being. Not saying that those aesthetics are bad, but just saying representation to make it more broad, and to kind of see yourself in lots of different ways and lots of different people. I think it's so important.
Exactly. And like, I agree. It's like, you do think that, okay, well, this is how I identify, and then you look out and you go, oh, okay, so that's what other people look like who have the same identity as me. And then just naturally as a human, you're like, okay, so I go to over there and that's how I look and that's how I fit in. But it is like, being queer looks like so many different things, and that's the point. Do you know what I mean? That's the point of just being queer, is just like being authentic and not having to push yourself into places. Like, that's the whole point. So I 100% agree. Yeah.
Totally.
I was reading something about how in the past, you know, you would have a record label, or you would be trying to get you'd be trying to get a label, you'd be trying to get a CD out, whatever. And I read something about how in the past you'd also, like, being the Kardashians and getting a TV show was the dream, but actually now you get a bigger audience on Instagram than you do from having a TV show. So why would you bother trying to have a TV show when you can have a hugely successful Instagram account directly contacting your customers or the people in your communities? So I wonder if that's had an effect on how marginalized marginalized identities are visible, and therefore you have more of a direct relationship with the audience, and you can therefore be more authentic, maybe. I don't know. I've got one huge question. We're gonna need to wrap up in a minute and show the trailer for Amber's film that she's made. But I just want to ask, I mean, it's a huge question, right? Why is it important that queer narratives are represented in music, and what needs to change for those narratives to be more visible? Why is it important? Huge question.
Go on, Anil. You take it. I'll give this.
I mean, I would reply to that question actually drawing on a lot of what Amber has said about representation. About the reason it's important is so that other people can see themselves in you as an artist. That's kind of 90% of what you're doing. And, you know, I think, is it Joni Mitchell who famously said, you know, if you're hearing my music and seeing me, then I'm not doing my job right. You should be seeing yourself when you hear my music. And I really took a lot from that. I think that, well, that's it, isn't it? So that's a big part of it, I think. But I think also one of the things I think is, I mean, I don't think anyone really knows why we make art and what the purpose of it is, but I think part of it must at least be a way of exploring and testing out in a very safe way relational things. And it's a way of shaping culture, but it's also a way of learning and growing. And if I think about how much I learn from the artists I love, you know, in terms of politics, in terms of messages, in terms of like values, you know, that there's so much that we learn from art. That's where and how we explore so much, and it's a safe place to do it. And I think there's so much that queer identities bring to the world. You know, there is so much influence on culture. If you took that away, what would the world actually look like in terms of entertainment? If you took away things like ballroom, what would it look like? If you took away all the, you know, I don't know, what would the world be like? It would be really boring, I think.
I love the idea of just queerness shaping culture, because it is just really prevalent in, like, the history of electronic music and dance music. It's hugely important, and, you know, multiple other genres. Amber, why is it important that queer narratives are represented in music, and what needs to change?
I think going off a bit of what Anil was saying as well, is that one of the things I kind of tell myself when I am writing is that if I'm being honest, it's kind of not really shining the spotlight on me, because you write yourselves into the narratives of the song. So I can be singing about one thing and that makes me quite feel vulnerable, but really when I hear a song, everyone just writes themselves into the narrative. So I take a lot of comfort in that when I'm sometimes thinking, you know, oh, make myself vulnerable here. But I think when your narrative is a queer narrative and someone can write themselves into it, then that's such a powerful thing, and such something that can, you know, it happened to me. I only ever got to the level of self-acceptance so quickly as a kid, because I saw these narratives and I saw these people existing, and without those people there, who knows what conclusions I would have come to as a child, you know. So I think it is just that, isn't it? It's representation. It's just people being visible. But I think just the more of it and the more honest people are, and the more stories and people from everywhere, from all corners of society, you know, are shown and given a voice. And I think that's how we change it, and how it gets better is just by more of it and just lifting it all up and showing everyone.
So we're coming to the end of our session. I just want to ask Anil one more question. Well, two questions really. Where can people find you on social media, and what are you working on next that's really exciting?
Anil.Sebastian. That's on Instagram. That's probably the best place. I am on Facebook, but not much. And what am I working on? Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh, my brain's gone blank. Oh, I'm making an album with my band, Harim. So that's really exciting. I just forget about it sometimes because we're all in different countries. So I'm writing that with the band, and that's the next thing. And so we're going to be starting to release music, hopefully towards the end of this year.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Great. And Amber, where can we find you on social media, and can you tell us about the film you've made that we're going to show a quick preview of and then send a link to?
Yeah, sure. So I am at I am Amber J on everything. So on all social platforms, all the good stuff. And the documentary, the mini documentary I made, was in partnership with Brighter Sound for their Let's Reconnect festival. And yeah, it's basically an interview series with 3 artists from the LGBTQ+ community, and it's about starting these sort of conversations, having these sort of conversations with these artists and talking about their personal experiences, but also lifting up their art and giving their art a platform and trying to broaden and you know, give them a reach as well, and just give them a place to talk about these topics, because you know, you have your interviews and they're not really the space to have these sort of conversations, and those when you're trying to promote your music. And so I wanted to give a space where they could talk about actual things that, you know, they hit a bit deeper for them and share their experiences. So yeah, that's basically what the mini doc is.
Well, this feels like a great moment to show the 30-second teaser of that, and then we'll post a link in the chat to that documentary.
Thank you.
Hopefully I do nothing now and it just happens.
You can change people's perceptions and perspectives by not changing yourself, because I think it does make you think, should you change how you appear?
And I think because in my childhood I was often not really happy with who I was. Secretly, deep down, I'd act like a really happy kid, but I never felt like I fit in anywhere.
There needs to be that hope, because what are we building a better world for if it's not to be happy?
So we'll post a link to that in the chat, and all that's left to say is thank you so much to Anil and Amber. I've been Mike Pony from Submerge. It's Mike Pony Curator on Twitter and at Submerge Fest on all the good stuff, as Amber said. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and I think now we're going to hear just from Kate from Brighter Sound, who's going to wrap up for us.
Well, thank you all so much for a really open, honest and thought-provoking conversation. I've really enjoyed listening to you talk. Thank you. Wish we had another, rest of the day really to listen to you. So thank you very much. And just really to quickly follow on from what Mike said, the link to Amber's documentary is in the comments box. And just to plug the final 2 events of the festival as well, we've got a session live on Facebook tonight with a collective of young musicians who go by the name of Remote Hope, and they'll be sharing some new music. That's live on Facebook at 6 o'clock, and then that's followed by our party to end the festival with a live Reconnect DJ set from Jam's Supernova, and that's going to be on Mixcloud at 8 o'clock. So thank you all again for a really fantastic afternoon's conversation, and hope to see people later on, and hope you enjoy watching the documentary as well. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.